Let's talk about the difficult issue of abortion. And to know what the path forward is, you have to know the path that got us here. I'm going to go very quickly through some constitutional history here. Roe versus Wade was an incorrectly decided case where the Supreme Court read something into the 14th Amendment that wasn't there. The 14th Amendment, among other things, ensures due process under the law. Well, that's about a procedural protection regardless of race or otherwise. Yet the Supreme Court says we're going to read that due process clause to somehow invent a right to privacy. That doesn't exist under the Constitution. Now, if you wanted to really make that interpretation, I would have at least made the argument for the privileges and immunities clause for citizens, to say that there are at least certain privileges and immunities that the government gives you. If you really want to torture a reading of a right to privacy that protects abortion, you might have at least used Section 1 of the 14th Amendment, the privileges and immunities clause. But nope, they didn't want to do that in the Supreme Court because of some long historical reasons related to the slaughterhouse cases. That's a longer history and a topic for another day. They went to the tortured interpretation of the substantive due process interpretation of the due process clause in the 14th Amendment. So they basically made it up. So what happened then about 50 years later in the Dobbs case last year was the Supreme Court overturned Roe correctly on constitutional grounds, not on the grounds of whether they like abortion or not, and that's what we need to understand, on the grounds of the Constitution of the United States, making the simple holding that the due process clause of the Constitution does not protect some unwritten right to privacy that includes the right to get an abortion. That's what the Supreme Court held last year, and correctly so. Great. That's a win for the Constitution. But now Republicans, I worry, are about to score an own goal. Look at every candidate in this race. Every other candidate who's on that debate stage was favoring some kind of federal ban. Even Nikki Haley, who really refuses to make her stance clear, when pressed, says that she would sign into law a federal abortion ban while offering a lot of mealy-mouthed atmospherics about nice-sounding statements that refuse to take a stand on the issue when she's forced to take some semblance of a stand, even says that she would favor a federal ban. Let's go to the constitutional basis. The federal government does not have the constitutional authority to write a ban when the federal government doesn't give them, when the Constitution does not give the federal government that power. What do they say? The Commerce Clause. Well, any Republican who's going to use the Commerce Clause to expand the federal government's role should not be in office, period. What do they say? The 14th Amendment protects life. Well, that's a more tortured interpretation of the 14th Amendment than the Roe versus Wade court brought to bear, because that was never used for the basis for the federal government to pass murder laws or anything else either. So we have to stick to those constitutional principles. This is an issue for the states. And I want to mark my words on this one. More unborn babies will die in the next 30 years if we federalize this issue, because the next time Democrats then gain control of the White House and Congress, they're going to say that if this is a federal issue, they can then use that to legislate Roe versus Wade into law. That's a loss for the pro-life movement that I consider myself to be part of as well. So what's the right answer? States need to take action. And how do we do this in a way that doesn't compromise on our pro-life principles, but also allows us to win this next general election in a landslide? Here's the answer. Here's the punchline that nobody else is talking about. We have allowed the left to define this issue as a men's versus women's rights issue. It need not be that way. Here's how. Greater sexual responsibility for men codified in the law. Speaking as a man, here's what I favor. Laws that say if a woman brings a child to term, then she, at her exclusive option and right, can make the man, under the law, the principal caretaker who's responsible for bringing up that child. We couldn't do this in most of our nation's history, but we can today because we have genetic paternity tests that are 100% reliable. If we're willing to do that, now a lot of men would say, wait, hold on, I'm not sure I'm ready for that. That's the point. It's not necessarily comfortable for most men, but that's exactly what we need to stand for life, to say that it's not about men's rights or women's rights anymore. It's about human rights. And I, for one, am ready to walk the walk when it comes to being pro-life. If a woman brings that child to term, if she bears the pregnancy, she can then make the man responsible for actually raising that child. Now we're in this together. This doesn't have to be a losing issue for Republicans. With that simple plank, and I want to make that part of the Republican Party's pro-life plank, part of our pro-life policy platform. If we do that, then this isn't going to be a losing issue for us. I think this will be an issue where we're able to stand for life. Stand for what Clarence Thomas said in that Dobbs case. That pregnant woman who's walking the street, and if her unborn child dies as a result of an assault, then that criminal should be held responsible for that death. Most Americans agree on that. And we give them the permission to say so if we codify into the law sexual responsibility for men. That's how Republicans win on this issue. There's not a single other Republican talking about it. If we make that the core of our pro-life platform, then we're going to be successful in making sure that abortion isn't some losing issue for us, but actually an issue where we're able to stand for our principles and still win elections as a consequence. That's the answer on abortion. Let's talk about the difficult issue of abortion.